Cool. Right, can everybody hear me? Hey! Fantastidoodle. I'm going to use one of these remote control what's-it-doodles. I don't know why I'm saying doodle, oodly doodle. So let's see if this works. Thank you for the introduction, Alistair. This is Cognitive Accessibility 107 Beta. This is an entirely new slide deck for a 3-year-old talk. So this is either going to go really well, very smoothly, and be very understandable, or we're all going to get confused halfway through, and then we're going to go and drink booze until it starts making sense. Okay? So this is actually quite good because I'm verbal. I can speak. I'm not reading you poetry. So occasionally when I go and do talks, I have a hard problem with speech. I often go long periods without speech. Had an operation a couple of years ago. Anesthetic did a number on my brain cells. And I had 17 months without speech. But I could still do public presentations, but I tended to start them with poetry, just to get the words flowing. So if my speech goes funny, or I start sounding like a drunk 5-year-old, then that's probably not intentional. If I whip my phone out and start typing things, then I'm just using alternative communication. Does that make sense? I'll also do that if I think you're boring. So if I wander off and you see me speaking to someone else afterwards, yes, I am that mean. It's just so much socially easier. Wait, that's the bit I wasn't supposed to admit to. Bollocks. So I'm Jamie, this is Lion. I don't think it's easy to get us confused. And as mentioned before, we work for the BBC. I'm a senior accessibility specialist, which is, I've met somebody else with the same job title as me. How brilliant is that? I think I was given that job title by Gareth, my line manager, who's here today for multiple purposes. One of which is so that when I say something really horrific, he can say,
this is not the opinion of the BBC.
Okay? And I may at some point refer to the unique way in which the BBC is funded. I'm not actually going to talk about my work. I'm going to talk about me. But I have a podcast. Please go download it. It's awesome. And we need the download numbers to get more of them made. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. That would be the BBC Ouch, Robin, Jamie and Lion show. Sorry, for the people at the back, I know you didn't hear that. Robin, Jamie and Lion show. Thank you very much. So, I'm going to start this with a bit of a disclaimer. This is a talk that's me talking about being me. I'm not going to talk about accessibility, really. I'm going to talk about life as an autistic person. But I'm going to talk about life as one autistic person, the one that I know best, Lion. So, it's just me. This isn't science. This is anecdote. And the plural of anecdote isn't data. It's still anecdote. This isn't rigorous. This isn't structured. In fact, if Gareth could... I've never actually done this slide with Gareth sat there. The BBC flew me to San Diego to go and do some presentations about 3 years ago. And I put in 3 talks, and I can't even remember the other 2, but I spent all of my time writing the other 2, and I forgot about this one. And during the lunch break, I was like, oh shit, I should write some slides for that. And I did what I can only describe as the laziest slapdash homework last-minute ditch effort, and it's easily the most popular talk I've ever done. So what I've learned is never bother writing talks carefully, and I probably shouldn't admit that around Gareth. So yeah, this talk comes from CSUN. It was written in a slapdash hurry, where I just had to get out what I meant. So it's got a bit beefier since then. This is now version 3.5 with a beta. But you know, this is just opinion. This is me just talking. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 3 things. I want to talk about modeling disability, a cognitive access model, cognitive accessibility model. So what's it like inside my head? And then I want to talk about the future. So let's kick off with modeling disability. So when people ask me what I do, I say that what I do and the goal of my team is to make sure that our apps, websites and services don't disable people. And then people go, ooh, okay. Then they tend to look at me like this and go, don't disable people? Surely you make things work for disabled people. And I sit back, take a tug on my pipe somehow, and go, disability has many lenses. Or I try to do some profound bollocks like that anyway. And this isn't a typical talk, because normally when we think about disability, the lenses we use are the lens of the microscope, us looking at disability. For this talk, it's disability looking back at you. This is the other way around. So for today, I'm not an accessibility specialist. My entire qualifications for this talk is that I'm stood here, I have a line, and I have a laptop. And that's about it. So I said that first we need to worry about defining accessibility. So disability has many lenses, and by that I mean that there's many different ways of defining disability. But the way that I define disability is to define two other things first. As we've heard today, there are many different types of impairment. So we have vision impairment, we have hearing impairment. Did I mention I did this talk the first time in San Diego? They have other types of impairment. And then afterwards was the Google party. There was a lot of very impaired people at the Google party. A couple were so impaired they had to hold onto the floor so they didn't fall off. So you have impairment, and impairment comes in many forms. So the first thing it's saying is impairment. So impairment is the factual change in somebody's ability, or somebody's ability to do a thing. So for example, I have trouble crossing roads. I have about the same amount of danger perception as a lemming, which is why the second person who's with me today is Ollie. His job is to stop me getting killed. The second thing then is the environment. So the environment is both the things that we build around us, but it's also like the attitudes and beliefs we hold about each other. And it's also incredibly difficult to find clip art for habits. So I kind of did the best I could. And it's also nice because that joke didn't get a sympathy laugh, which is even worse. So we have these attitudes and these beliefs we hold about each other. And then finally, we have things like expectation. If you give someone high expectations and not the support to achieve it, they fail and blame themselves. If you give people low expectations, you block their ability. Or in other words, expectations are the lies we tell ourselves about each other and then refuse to correct afterwards. I think a lot of autistic people might understand that feeling. But here's the important thing. Disability is when you take an impairment and a badly designed environment. The environment disables the person. This is known as the social model of disability. Can you stick your hand up? Thank you. Just everyone stick your hands up for a moment. This is really great for my anxiety, and down and up and down. So who here's, keep your hand up if you've read the Equality Act. Well done, you interesting people. Can anybody here remember the two requirements for a disability under the Equality Act?
Long term.
Yep, defined as?
More than 6 months.
More than 12 months, but close enough, thanks for playing. Sorry, I'm being an arsehole, that's horrible. Well done. Oh, ever an optimist, I agree. And what's the second one?
Impact.
Significant impact. It's substantial impact, but, close enough. The point of this is that we disable people. People don't come to us disabled. We disable them when we get it wrong. So that's the first thing, that disability is a thing that we create as product people. Our users don't come to us disabled. We disable them. So the second part of this is about how environments disable me. So now I said that I kind of made this up on the spot. I made it up and I came up with this idea, that everything I do goes through 3 stages. I receive information, I process information, and I act on information. This might be slightly stolen, borrowed, plagiarized from the WCAG stuff, perceivable, operable, usable, and robust. But this is specifically like a loop I run in my head constantly. And what I want to do today is I want to talk you through some examples of this, and then show you some of the things that work for me and some of the things that don't. Or in other words, which environments disable me and which environments don't. So let's get this started. The first thing I want to talk about is perception. And then I want to talk about affordance, because these two concepts come together in order for me to receive information. Believe it or not, this is a fire alarm. And as two of my managers are here, they can vouch for how well I don't handle fire alarms. Loud bleepy things that immediately stop me from being able to think straight. Not really a very useful thing for me. However, this fire alarm, it tells me about information in a way that doesn't disable me. It's a little voice, a lovely lady comes up and goes, "There is smoke building in the kitchen. The alarm may sound. The alarm is loud." And at that point, you can whip your phone out and silence it. Or in my case, my friends over the road can silence it because they have access to my fire alarms as well. So what's happening here is that an environment is making something perceivable to me in a way that doesn't harm me. Another good example of this is simple old colour contrast. If I can't access the information because I physically can't get it through my eyeballs, which is totally a medical term, then I can't get to the information. So basic things like contrast. You know, I've had websites I simply can't use because of contrast. I've even sat there fiddling with like monitor settings to try and get things that I could read properly. I also sometimes find myself distracted in doing things like trying to click bars between things, thinking they're arrows, or the one that I had the other day on the Barclays website. There was a cross in the corner on something that popped up, and I tried to click it, and I couldn't click it. And I was like, what's going on? The box was loading a thing, and until the thing had loaded, it didn't bind the event to close it. So I was sat there going, oh, I must just be an idiot. So I blamed myself immediately, went, you bloody idiot, what are you bloody doing, you moron, what are you doing? And I closed the browser window and went and had a sulk. And I came back to work about 30 minutes later. So contrast is important. But what I actually got wrong there was I got the affordance wrong. Well, I sort of understood what I had to do, but I didn't understand the whole picture. So the second part of receiving information is understanding affordance. So affordances are, from Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things, when you look at something, how you intuitively know how to use it. That's an affordance. So this is a great example. The push door is green with a guy going whoop, and the pull door is red with a whoop going pull. That makes sense to me. They all seem to think it uses colour, images, and text all together to clearly give me an affordance for what's happening. Now, of course, if it is a pull door and it's got that rather than a handle, we're still going to be a little bit confused. When we apply this to technology, this is about using conventions. So, for example, this is a wonderful form for me. It's asking me a question. It's giving me two definitive choices. It's visual. It's got shadows. It looks clickable. So that's an example of good affordance. So this is the point where I'm going to slightly hide behind the podium so Gareth can't see me. This is a project at the BBC of which I've told I must be objective. Moving on. So, is that objective? Thank you. So affordances are the ability to look at what's happening and understand what you're intuitively able to do. So you've then got in your head like this list of things that you know you can do. So then you have to filter that list and come to a decision. Hope that makes some sense. So let's jump into filtering. So filtering is giving me the options to control the information coming into my system. You might have seen me earlier, sat with my headphones on, listening to The Sound of Silence, which is ironic because that's a song. Sidebar for a moment. Gareth is going to give me that look. See, that's that look. So I kind of fundamentally object to the medicalisation of autistic people. I think for autistic people and many other conditions and groups, we're applying the same sort of logic that was applied to gay people in the 1950s. We're trying to apply medicine to a thing that's really an aspect of diversity. And there's all these things about getting rid of autistic people, but then you wind back time and you go, well, the person who invented the LCD was quite clearly autistic. You know, there's all these discoveries and things, and I think the medical model doesn't fit autism very well. Hence I do this social stuff, and I'm now going to stop going on a sidebar and actually get on with the talk I was here to give. I'm less distracted than normal, I promise. I haven't hidden under anything yet. So going back to filtering. So I use my headphones to filter, and then on the web I use obvious things for filtering, like, filters. I didn't understand the word refine. I quite like milling machines. To me, a refining pass is a pass that's less than 10,000ths of an inch, using something like not an auger, a fly cutter. That's a refine. I didn't know that was anything to do with filtering. But these are examples of filtering. Now, sometimes sites don't give me the ability to filter on the site, so I have to do it myself. And one of the ways that I do it is I use screen zooming. So I remove all the other stuff, and it allows me to focus on what I'm looking on. So earlier it was great because someone was you're asking how many people here use AT, and my arm was getting tired. And I was like, oh, again? But no, this sort of screen zoom. And I think a lot of people do this. On mobile phones now, you just go whoop, and you make it bigger, and you move all the rest of the junk out of the way. So for me, because I read very slowly, being able to zoom in and make everything else disappear makes stuff a lot more accessible to me. It removes one of those barriers. So after I've filtered, I've then got to make decisions. I've then got to decide things. So I need the information to make a decision, but I also need the information of what's going to happen. I think there's one button that is the most valuable button in human history, and it is the undo button in Photoshop. Because the main benefit of digital photo editing and digital design isn't layout and all that sort of stuff. It's the ability to undo, and to undo 20 times and go forwards, to modify human history effectively. The Photoshop has a little time machine in it, and that is hugely useful. Now, it may sound like, oh, well, timers and undo buttons, how's that relevant to the web? Well, we all have a little time machine built into our browser there, the back button. I was chatting to a user when we were doing some user research for news, and this is something that we observe quite often, which is that advanced users will open 5 tabs and navigate many things. But a lot of users kind of work as a tree. They open a thing, they go into a thing, they hit back to get to where they feel safe and comfortable. So the back button and breaking the back button is kind of like, if you want to really confuse me, break my back button. So the second part of deciding is about having kind of like other ways of reaching decisions. So this could be featured products if it's common, or it could be editorialization. I kind of have this habit of doing kind of screen captures of the news homepage, but they tend to date my talks really badly. So as this is the third version of this deck, it now has a screen capture of the science page, because damn it, I bet you can't guess what the science top stories were today. Makes it a little bit more timeless and a little bit less horrific. So editorial focus and personalization means that I'm only being presented with options to decide between that are relevant to me. So the last bit is actioning. So I've taken the information, got it into my head, filtered it, reached a decision. Now I have to plan it and do it. So planning. So here's a good example for planning. In New York and around London, they tell you how much time you have left to cross a road. I kind of confused one of my carers when I moved to a new place, and I kind of confused the carers when I said I wanted to benchmark the roads. I also benchmarked my cooker, so I knew the difference. No, when something says 4, turn it down a bit, well, actually, there's no point turning down between 5 and 4. It's only a 3% difference in the time to boil a pot of water. However, between 2 and 3, there's like a 45% difference. That dial, it changes the current, not the temperature. They're not related at all. Anyway, so I ended up learning, okay, how quickly can I cross a road? And I reckon it takes me about, well, I say I reckon it takes me, I measured to the second. It takes me about 6 seconds per half road, per lane of traffic. So because these signs have this information on it, I can go, I can make that crossing or I can't make that crossing. Similarly, and this is nice because this has been in my slide deck for a while, it wasn't purely put there to get an invite or to make friends. Can we help with your survey, please? Telling me what I need up front is another useful way to help me plan. So for example, when I come up to a form, I'll often have to go and get help or collect documents. I get stuck with forms continuously. They're probably my weakest area because you're asking me questions in ways that I don't quite understand. So telling me that I need my NI number, my mum's maiden name, inside leg measurement, and what's the 1000th prime number, I can get that data ahead of time. Having to Google for my own date of birth is, I still think, kind of like the coolest moment of technology when I was able to Google, when was Jamie Knight born? And it linked to a blog post where I'd written about being born, effectively. And I was able to go, ooh, August. That was kind of useful. It's a great tip, just ask Google or the NSA, they know everything. So if you need to get something, then having all that information up front. And then the other tip of this is about almost like the BBC moment. So if you're doing a presentation, for the BBC, you need to do 2 things. You have to mention Doctor Who, which I've now done, so I've certified that requirement. And you always have to reference something like Blue Peter and the phrase, here's one I made earlier. Well, actually, that's really useful for me. If you want me to understand something, here's one I made earlier, so I know what I'm aiming for, is really useful. Examples of a correctly filled out form are incredibly useful to me, for example. So I say to a lot of people, if you want to learn how to describe someone of how to plan, watch some episodes of Blue Peter. Watch them make things. Watch how they display and describe it. It's brilliant. So I've got the information, I've filtered it, I've made a decision, I've planned what I want to do, now I have to actually do it. So for me, the environment poses voice barriers, noise barriers, light levels. We've had to adjust the brightness of the lights, etc. Good things for me are quiet, they give me physical access. These are the tools I use when I'm cooking, on the basis that they're really hard to break. It doesn't matter if I drop them. Glass bowls and me, they just quickly turn into like bits of glass on the floor. And they've got like physical, they're rubber coated, so they sit on the surface, and if I can't feel my fingers properly and I'm churning away, they work. So that in the real world is an example of doing, an aid for doing. It helps me have more autonomy, which is slightly different from independence. So what I want in my life is autonomy more than independence. So independence is when you can do stuff for yourself. Autonomy is when you can make decisions about your life. So for me, I'm kind of more focused on autonomy than independence. So I could choose to come to this event, even though I have no chance of doing it on my own. However, sometimes in the current climate and in the care system, we tend to confuse a very limited independence as effective autonomy. But that's a whole other chat for another day. This gives me autonomy. It gives me the ability to do something. It gives me the ability to make some decisions about what I'm going to do that day. I want to cook, well, there's things to aid me to cook. Equally, I can also use screen readers. So I find it useful to have information come at me from two directions at once, like for example, sound and vision, or colour and sound. So it can help me understand things. And I quite often need voice over running, or I use, has anybody here seen like Enable Page Speak, where you slide down 2 fingers on your phone and it will read stuff off the page to you? Yeah. It's brilliant. I quite often sit there with my fingers on my phone just scanning through the page using that rather than using my eyes, because my eyes ache or I'm tired, or simply I'm in a more hearing mood than a reading mood. I also do things that can sometimes get really confusing, like listen to an audiobook whilst also reading the book. I did this for Harry Potter. I listened to it whilst reading it, and I found all the conditions where Stephen Fry went off script. And then I put them in a blog post and documented them, because I'm that sort of person. That sort of person. That's a phrase, isn't it? So in a nutshell, if you don't want to disable me, these are the things I think we should think about. Now, wouldn't it be great if I gave you a set of guidelines and a checklist? Yeah, because we all love checklists. I'm not going to do that. I don't actually believe in guidelines, which is weird because I'm an editor of a set of guidelines. Sorry, Gareth. I think guidelines invoke the wrong sort of action. And the better thing is to teach people to have good conversations. So I would like to leave you with questions for you to ask yourselves when you're building things. How will our users perceive the information? How will our users comprehend it? How will the users filter it? How do we support their decision making? How do they plan and how do they do? So in a nutshell, the cognitive accessibility model is that lot. So that's basically the bit that I kind of thought up then, and then this is some of the stuff that's come after. I think in the future we need to rethink what we think of as usable. Accessibility isn't a bad word, inclusion isn't a bad word, but I prefer usable. You just increase the people who you consider usability as for. So if you take a population and you give them a certain ability, your graph looks something like this. It's really tempting to go for that big peak in the middle, but that big peak in the middle doesn't represent most of your users most of the time. You know, I think I've said to about 1 billion people over and over again, with no statistical proof whatsoever, that I think you can hit 80% of people 80% of the time by carefully using colour, by making sure it works with the keyboard, and by labelling things. You know, it's not that difficult. And if you ask yourself those questions when you're running through, and you ask yourself, how will our user filter? How will our user make decisions? You expand the usability of your thing from that little spike in the middle to everybody else. Because here's the thing, as I hinted at earlier, we're all different, and that's not necessarily worse, wrong, or anything else. I don't think we should think of users as disabled or abled or with disabilities or without disabilities or left-handed or ginger. We should think of them as diverse, impaired, or distracted. So we have a lot of diversity in the people that we serve, especially at the BBC. If you include the stuff we do with the W3C, the number of people affected by what we do is in the billions. Every day our numbers of users are in the millions. So we have a wonderfully diverse audience. We have an impaired audience. That might be that they're holding a baby and using a phone one-handed. It might be that they've got a bright screen, or it might be that, you know, they forgot their glasses today. But we also have a distracted audience, an audience that's moving quickly between things. And the things that you do to help distracted people will help impaired people. The things that you do to help impaired people will help people with other diversity needs. So in a nutshell, that's this presentation. I'm almost on time, which is incredible, especially for a beta slide deck, because they normally go long. But I'd like to kind of round out with a couple of quick fire points. I started by saying that our goal is not to make websites work for disabled people. The goal of my team, as I express it, because we should probably sit down and have a team goal, hint, hint. We could put it on our Jira space. Our goal is that we build websites, apps, and services that don't disable people. And in a nutshell, thank you very much for listening. And I'm going to do some questions now on stage, but before I move on, I've got an invite for you. I hate eye contact, and I hate the, hi, what do you do? Oh, I'm a da-da-da-da. So come colour with me. I'm going to have some colouring books and a table, because then I don't have to do eye contact. I can go, I'm colouring in. And I don't have to do eye contact. So if you've got some detailed questions, or you want to do a what about for me, or one of those questions that isn't really a question, or the sort of thing I ask, because I've got a bit of reputation. Sorry, Alistair. Come and ask me those then. But apart from that, I can take some questions now.
So you said to design websites not to make people disabled. Would you rather not say to enable people, which is a more positive spin on things, rather than saying not disabling someone? Or is that a completely different thing to...
No, because it puts the responsibility in the wrong place. We don't have disabilities. You have vision impairment, blind. Or, do you prefer blind?
I don't mind anything.
You don't mind. Okay, so I use identity first language. I am autistic. I am not somebody with autism. I'm currently with Lion. If I put him over here, I'm without Lion. So the way that I see it is you have a lot of people with impairments and a lot of people with diverse identities, but they don't have to be disabled. And if you turn it around and assume they're disabled first, or you use the disability word, you almost shift responsibility to other people. It's great, because in Sweden, they don't really have a direct word for disability. Their closest for disabled is hindered, which I really like, because it pushes that focus outwards. So does that answer the question?
No, so my question was, would you rather not say that we should design websites to enable people, enable everyone basically, as you said, whether they're distracted
Well,
or...
if you don't disable people, you're also impairing them. I think that's semantics. I wouldn't put a positive spin on it, because it's too easy for companies to pat themselves on the back. Earlier, we actually came up with a definition for blue chip. We've decided that, like enterprise software is software brought by somebody who doesn't have to use it. A blue chip company is a company that's completely personalityless. The moment they lose their personality and become an amorphous blob, they become a blue chip company.
The form that you were talking about earlier, the BBC form,
Mm-hmm.
I know why I would think that you didn't like that form, but can you tell me why you didn't like that form?
Can I give my personal opinion?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is my personal opinion, not the opinion from the BBC. The forms have passed every test they've been given, but they don't work for me. And when you look closely at the test results, the testers say there was hesitation, there was concern, there was confusion. They worked it out eventually. To me, those forms look like a heading with an underline. I didn't realise I could click it. I was asked to test the page, and I sat there and I stared at it and went, where's the form? And I consider myself pretty technically competent. And when I read about things like, they went and tested some autistic people, and their definition of high functioning, and we can get into that another day, was people who could probably log in by themselves. And to me, you're losing an opportunity to do better. We don't always have to be a design masterclass. And the second part of it, the daftest thing of it, is they're the fucking login pages of all the pages that we need to work. Just do the bloody obvious thing. Why put barriers in front of people that don't achieve anything? Also, it looks more like Android, and some designer gets to show it off at the pub.
Just want to say, that form, I was with my mother and she was trying to log on to BBC on the iPad, and she just stared at it. She had no idea what to do.
Yep.
So, fix it, please.
I shall inform my line manager of my intention to work with the team to improve the forms. I know somebody else on our team is already looking at forms, so I won't stand on his or her feet.
You mentioned you weren't a big fan of guidelines.
No.
So you would encourage us all to have good conversations, I think you said instead. I wondered if you could maybe give us a bit more detail on your thoughts on that.
I would like to direct you to one of my colleagues, who will hopefully not be embarrassed when I ask her to stick her hand up. Emma Pratt-Richards, who is our very amazing champion manager. We have the Champions Network. We have embedded people in all of our major products. And what we do, I think there's multiple champions in the room and former champions, which is awesome. I won't ask you to put your hands up, but you are brilliant. Rather than, why do this and how do we do it? So the first part of it is rather than do accessibility at the end, we do it throughout the process. And by having a champion who asks questions, so simply the first time they see a design, we're using colour to communicate meaning. How can we do this differently? Or how will a keyboard user use this? Or how will somebody reach a decision? How will somebody filter this? They start questions about solutions, and if I've learned anything, it's that designers and developers like being given problems to solve. However, if you give them guidelines, you're skipping that learning process. You're telling them what they must do. And as a recovering developer, I'm not entirely sure, I develop at the weekend crime fighting software. And I mean that literally, which is really cool and slightly terrifying because one of our clients actually is also a client of Barclays. When you give developers solutions, not problems, they tend to roll their eyes and tell you to stick it in a Jira ticket. When you say to them, Carl, can we make this easier to decide about? How do we filter this data? How do we make this more obvious? Or, when you give people questions, how do we help blah? How do we help this scenario? So to kind of give you nuts and bolts, we have the champions network within each team. We don't do any audits. We don't believe in audits. Instead, we work with teams, we give them the skills, and the purpose of our team is to move knowledge around. In fact, I think our champions are way ahead of us in many technical areas. For example, React. React makes me want to vomit, so I don't really do it much. But I know that we have champions with great React skills who I can learn from. And then I might mention something in passing that they learn from. So the purpose of our team is to move knowledge around rather than to hold knowledge. And the way that we do that is by asking questions. When a new champion joins, we say to them, task 0, go grab the guidelines and ask us some questions. We'll ask you some questions. Let's get this started.
I just had a quick question in regards to champions in your teams. I was wondering if you feel it's counterproductive to make either your developers or designers the champions within your team if they're the ones creating it themselves, or whether it actually evokes a more interesting conversation.
I think there's a much more interesting answer to that Emma can give you.
Okay.
And my answer would be, why not both? In fact, statistically, both is better. Although we have slightly weak evidence base for that. But come talk to me in a couple of weeks when me and a colleague have built a tool to go and analyse pages in bulk.
I'm curious to know more about Lion.
Lion? Oh, everybody always asks about Lion.
I'm sure you get that a lot.
Yeah.
What the connection is, the relationship.
He's a big fluffy toy that goes everywhere with me and has done for a very long time. He's reliable, he's never let me down, he smells kind of specific. It's a comfort object. He helps ease anxiety, but he's also a great conversation starter. When we were at that Google party with lots of people holding onto the floor, other colleagues were like, I wish I had your ability to walk up to groups of strangers. Because I can walk up and go, hello, it's okay, he's been fed, how are you? It works really well. And also, he's kind of like my autistic white stick. So if you're a blind person, you've got a white stick and a cane, you're indicating something to other people, you're communicating a thing. When I start bouncing around with a giant fluffy lion and occasionally can't talk, I communicate a thing. And in fact, when I was first it's really weird actually, because I've only ever had 3 line managers in my life, and the 2 good ones are in this room. Well, okay, actually I'll rephrase that because it's going on video. The 2 who probably had the easiest job are in this room. And these 2 blokes changed my life, especially the one at the front who told me, no, Jamie, you are disabled by your environment. And I went, whatever, and then kind of picked it up a few years later. But when I was first at the BBC, I used to think that my job as an autistic person was to be as unautistic as possible. I grudgingly let myself have Lion. But it used to stay in my backpack, didn't come out, and to say that I slightly socially foobarred would be a bit of an understatement. I think it worked. Nobody died. Lion didn't maul anybody. But a lot of relationships would have been a lot easier if I'd simply been more me. And kind of having Lion everywhere with me, but then also being bold enough to have him out, helps me be more me, which at the end of the day is who the BBC are hiring. They're not hiring the person I can pretend to be, they're hiring me. And that sometimes means you get a free Lion, or they hire Lion and get a free Jamie, which is probably more accurate. The final thing is, if you remember one thing from today, and I'm going to get eaten for this tonight, Lion is a great example for accessibility. His brain is full of fluff, his ears are literally made of cloth, his eyes are buttons, and his paws are the size of paws. So if you think of the ultimate impaired user, it's Lion. Sorry, dude.
So, Jamie, you understand technology and you can kind of, you know what you're doing. And
maybe.
You still tend to struggle with potentially form filling.
Yeah.
What about, I'm generalizing here, what would you say that a general autistic person could do to alert their carer or their parent or their teacher that actually I'm stuck, I don't know what to do?
Oh, have permission to be autistic. That's the biggest one. Like, I wasn't allowed to be autistic. I had to be grown up. I had to be mature. I had to be high functioning. So what quite often happens is you give everybody the indication that any time that you haven't succeeded is your own fault. You didn't try hard enough. And then you ask people to ask for help. And it's kind of a contradiction. I go into schools from time to time, which is harrowing sometimes, deeply exciting and adventurous other times, and boring as shit other times again. Okay, so here's a great example. So when I couldn't speak, I had 17 and a half months where I couldn't speak. And even now, my speech is not reliable. You lot are lucky and or unlucky. Either, tomato, tomato. I didn't have speech, and at first we tried things like, well, we'll go on Skype and I'll have text chat, and everybody else can talk and I'll have text chat and they'll ask me. And it didn't work, because what had happened is we tried to crowbar one impaired person into a group by trying to help that person be more like the rest of the group, right? And at that time, I went with it, because I was like, well, it's my problem, right? I'm the disabled, I'm the impaired person, it's my fault. If I'm better, if I try harder, then one day perhaps I can be acceptable. But that's what we teach autistic people. You're not acceptable unless you can do these things. And that was bollocks. In the end, we turned it completely upside down. We start all of our team meetings on Slack. We talk on Slack. And then if everybody's happy to be verbal, we move on to a call. But it's like progressive enhancement. We start with what works and then we go up from there. And when we use Slack, what happens is not that nobody is impaired, it's just that the impairment is spread more equally. So all of us hate Slack equally. So it just kind of flows better because we're all pissed off.
So as a visually impaired user, I'm very interested in sort of my own loyalties to brands or websites that I can use easily with, for example, zooming into a browser.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have? I'm not so interested in the specific brands, but I'm just curious to know if you are loyal to certain websites that help you, that you find easy to navigate.
I like routine and I like repeatability. So it takes a lot of effort for me to change. It's like inertia, right? It takes a lot of momentum and pushing and build up for me to change. And once I'm up to speed on something, I'm very hard to deflect. I'm kind of like Newton's 3 laws. Just assume I'm a heavy mass. So yeah, I don't know if I'd call it loyalty. I would call it finding the path of least resistance and having momentum. However, when things do go wrong, the speed at which I can go from this is brilliant to, oh, fuck it, this is awful, can be very quick. And I'm not going to name any specific brands, but one of them starts with N and ends with soft. Used to make a really good operating system. Then they ruined it quite a lot, and now they're sort of fixing it again, but I don't trust them. I will rather go with something that I don't find Mac to be as good as Windows got to, but it's much more consistent, so that's why I prefer it. So do you kind of get what I mean? It's kind of like, it's about maintaining that momentum and building trust rather than loyalty.
Can we say a massive thank you to Jamie?